Yes.
Sure. I wanted to ask you, there's been a new filings in the Englap Sang case in the Southern District. And since you'd said previously that the UN is monitoring this, these filings have to do directly with South-South News, and they have put into the record a letter in which South-South News is described as wanting to have a part of this Macau center that was the thing that the Englap Sang was trying to procure these documents for. It's described as a global media platform authorized by the UN, and they put these in as essentially saying that this is a conduit for bribery. So I wanted to know, since you said that the UN is monitoring this, given that the prosecutor Preet Bharara has put this letter, I guess they got it in discovery or in some other fashion, in, what is the UN's response to it?
Well, like I said, we have been monitoring and are looking at all of the information that is coming up. And in that regard, as you know, there's an ongoing review of the status of South-South News. There's no conclusion to that review at this point.
And I'd asked on Tuesday, I'd asked Stefan in writing, there was a meeting held down in 1B basement, DPI and something called the Malko Investment Group. And since I Googled Malko Investment Group and nothing came up, I sent him an email and asked, what is this entity and why is this meeting being held in the UN? And I guess I wanted to reiterate to you, why would DPI be having a meeting in a UN briefing, in a meeting room with an investment group, and particularly one that is either misnamed on the sign or doesn't exist at all?
I'm not aware of the circumstances of the meeting. I will check with the DPI what they have to say about that. But at this stage, I'm not aware whether they're the sponsor of that particular meeting or not.
There's a picture of the sign. I mean, I wrote to you.
I'm not aware of the details or whether they're the actual sponsors. Sometimes meetings are set up by member states or organizations. We'd have to check.
The French troops that were charged with sexual abuse in the Central African Republic, and they quote the Office of the Paris Prosecutor in Charge as saying there's been no significant progress in the case since May 2015, and they predict that no one will ever be held accountable for the alleged sexual abuse that underlay the firing of Compass and that gave rise to a lot of this scrutiny. So I wanted to know, since it's been said from this podium that the UN is very happy with the way the French are proceeding, could a process that results in no indictments and no discipline be viewed positively by the UN?
Well, we actually have to see how the process plays itself out. I'm not going to prejudge what happens at the end of the road. It's still underway, and we have been assured by our French colleagues that they are following up. We always try to make sure that different member states adhere to their own responsibilities in terms of investigating these kinds of acts and making sure that people are held accountable, and we do that in this case as it proceeds.
And in the case of the Burundians that Stefan said yesterday, that he named them as the nationality charged in the most recent charges. I guess, he didn't. What did the mission respond to the UN in terms of what steps they're supposed to take, and what is the connection between that process and the impending deployment in September of 800 more Burundian troops to CAR?
Stefan, I believe, made clear that if there are problems that are unresolved, there are a number of steps that can be taken, and those would include changes made to involving the repatriation of troops or of contingents. So that remains the case as we try to get to the bottom of what these latest allegations, which date from May, entail. We have informed the permanent mission of Burundi by note verbal of these allegations and the need to take steps, and we're now going to be in dialogue with them about what their follow-up is. Yes.
I just wanted to ask, there's been an announcement of that the U.S. is deploying these advanced missile system in South Korea. It's something it's said that, I know he's in China now, I don't know if the issue has come up, but it's also something that North Korea has put out a number of statements condemning. In terms of peace and security and stability and dialogue on the Korean Peninsula, does the Secretary General have any view of this deployment?
We don't have any particular comment on the deployment at this stage. It's something to be monitored. Of course, for us, the priority is that all concerned parties need to step up efforts to reduce tension and find a path to resume dialogue for denuclearization. And with that, I will get to our guest.
Matthew Lee, Intercity Press, on behalf of the Free UN Coalition for Access. Thanks for the briefing. I wanted to ask you about the I guess, banking issues, where the U.S. law that apparently has led to the closing of a lot of the bank accounts, and there's some say that this may have some impact on even humanitarian issues to the degree that a hospital had accounts cut. So I wanted to know, one, does the UN have any role in sort of ensuring that these sanctions don't have this impact? And do you think that this law, does it create tension, as some have said? Does it, is it, and separately, and I'll keep it totally separately, that the Blom Bank explosion, what's your view of it as relates to the law?
Yeah, the Blom Bank explosion, I can't say I have an informed view. I would only have a view on what's, not a view, I have an impression on what's reported. It was, as I don't know if you recall the pictures, it was sort of like a briefcase placed next to a car. It was intended, the understanding is it was intended to send a message, but it's not sure, and no real responsibility has been claimed. But I think what's more important is to look indeed at the compliance with the law. In the UN, officially, we don't have a role. However, I think what's important is that the governor of the central bank, Riyad Salama, is actually doing a remarkable job in ensuring that there is compliance, because it was actually it's compliance with the law in a way that it also doesn't inadvertently hinder banking in Lebanon. As you know, all Lebanese banks, the financial services sector and banking is very important actually for the Lebanese economy. It's one of the few areas of economic stability, and we live in a global world. So it's important that the law is well understood, complied with, but equally so indeed that you do not have an anticipated action by banks where indeed individuals who are not in the purview of the law are inadvertently hit, or humanitarian and other organizations. But they have to be very clear. I think there's been some, so to speak, better understanding, and I think the governor of the central bank has a mechanism, which is also public, where there's a 30-day period. If a bank has a concern over an account holder or an account, this needs to go to the central bank and the decision is made there. So I think in the early days what was seen is that banks were fearful of possible errors or mistakes or maybe real, and they closed bank accounts. And whereas they were not fully, I think, aligned with what the process was that should have been followed. Now I think the situation seems to be calmer, as most people sort of understand it, and I think the banks also feel sort of shielded. And I think this will help probably for Lebanon to be compliant, and for obviously stability to prevail.
And just one, you said before that there were attempts by the UN system to work with, I guess, the World Bank and also, I think, the IMF, so that as a, quote, middle-income country, Lebanon can receive aid. I know there's been some progress on the World Bank. Has there been anything at the IMF, and are there any steps coming up? Thanks.
Yeah, but if you could talk about the criteria, I don't think actually the technical criteria have been addressed yet, but I have to double check that. What's important, though, that significant concessional financing has been made available precisely for cases such as Lebanon is living through now, Jordan too, to deal with the complexity of the current situation, knowing it surpasses the economic coping capacity of a country such as Lebanon and Jordan, but also others. In the case of Lebanon, however, we need the decisions to be made so they can access the financing. That's already at least pledged. Yeah.